Welcome to television program Contact. My guest today is Bohdan Kordan, Professor Emeritus of International Relations at the University of Saskatchewan. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Your academic publication, No Place Like Home, published last year by the McGill University Press, is shortlisted for the Kobzar Book Award, so congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
And this book is the topic of our conversation today. It deals with the tragic period in Canadian history, internment camps. So what were the internment camps and why Canadian government needed to establish them during World War I?
Well, these were camps that were established to house essentially what was described as prisoners of war. But in effect, what had happened was that there were 8,579 individuals, primarily of Ukrainian origin, who were interned as prisoners of war, but they were enemy aliens. These were, in effect, civilians in Canada, immigrants who had arrived to Canada, but in the context of this global conflict were deemed a security threat and were placed in 24 camps across the country. Most of them were on the Canadian frontier, places such as Banff, Jasper, Kapuskasing in Northern Ontario, Spirit Lake in Quebec, and elsewhere.
I know that you've been researching this topic for many, many years during your career. Take us through the process of working on this book.
Yeah, so I've been working on this now since 1988. I was sort of part of the redress movement to claim ultimately some kind of acknowledgement and restitution for what is generally accepted as a historical wrong, historical injustice. If I can sort of remind everyone what it is that these people were essentially immigrants. These were individuals deemed a security threat, but that security threat was broadly interpreted to sort of identify individuals who were jobless, homeless, unemployed, and the government deemed it necessary to introduce these security measures, wartime measures, to remove them from urban centers and place them in these prison camps. So this has been a concern of mine for some 40 years. This is the sixth book that I've written on the subject, among others. But the point is that it's preoccupied me because we usually have this kind of sort of understanding of Canada as a pluralistic, tolerant society committed to rule of law and justice, and yet this seems out of keeping with what we generally accept Canada to be. And so I needed to explore this. Curiosity got the better of me, and so I spent a lot of time looking at it.
Was there a possibility for an enemy alien to avoid the internment camp?
Well, there were some 650,000 individuals who had come from countries such as Germany, Austro-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, that necessarily were deemed enemy aliens. In and amongst that group, about 88,000 were deemed sufficiently sort of a security threat that they had to register, and they had to report on a biweekly basis to various sort of officials, and that means that there was 88,000 people, 88,000 of roughly 640,000 individuals who came from these belligerent countries who were subject to a surveillance regime, reporting regularly to the police. So to your question, which is how could you avoid it? Well, not everybody, had to report. Not everybody was deemed an enemy alien. By the way, in that 640,000, about half were enemy aliens. The others were naturalized citizens. But of that half, of the 250 or 300,000, approximately 88,000 individuals had to report. That meant roughly 1 in every 3 individuals had to report to police. So to your question about how could you avoid it, you could avoid it, but it was those people were in a very difficult position at the time.
Mm-hmm. And you already mentioned some numbers. Can you give us more statistics about these camps? Like how many people were kept? How long did it last? What were the casualties? How they were treated, or after they were able to leave the camps? What happened to their families?
Sure. Those are a lot of questions. There were 8,579 that were interned. Each camp, more or less, at different times, held about 600 individuals. Some camps less, some camps more. Kapuskasing, Ontario, for example, held 1,200 such individuals at a specific time. These were individuals who were brought there essentially as prisoners of war. But the prisoners of war status, as it was understood in international law, was that they didn't have to. They could volunteer to work, but they couldn't be forced to work. But the government, the whole purpose of internment was to get these people who were unemployed off the streets and force them to work. And one of the ways they did this was sort of ignore international law about the treatment of war prisoners and simply designated these individuals as so-called civilian prisoners of war. And in international law, there's no at the time, there was no sort of understanding of what treatment they could be subject to. This allowed the government to actually compel these individuals to work under extreme pressure, under bayonets, the prospect of being shot, and so on and so forth. So these individuals were subjected to fairly abusive treatment in these camps. They were forced to work very long and hard hours. For the most part, and they did extraordinary work at a time when much of the kind of public works projects to which they were subjected to had a shortfall in terms of both labor and resources. So these people were in effect seen as a useful resource. And for those who were overseeing these projects, such as building the roads in Canada's national parks or the roads in the interior of British Columbia, these individuals were put to work heavy labor, heavy labor. Many of these people just simply didn't understand why they were being treated this way. You know, they had nothing to do with the war. Why were they designated prisoners of war? And so there's a lot of not just simply uncertainty, but depression and frustration and anxiety. A lot of people sort of felt this way, and we see casualties. What are the casualties? Those that tried to escape were shot. Others fell into a state of despair and depression, committed suicide, and the like. So we see that this is the consequence of government policy and government action against essentially individuals who were innocent.
Take us about your thought process during choosing the title for the book, No Place Like Home.
I chose it deliberately. It refers actually to a movie, The Wizard of Oz, No Place Like Home, when Dorothy arrives in the land of Oz and she wants to return home. And there's a sense that home is a place that we all want to be. We're all searching for home. We all want to return back to that place of security and safety. And that's what home should represent. And in the context of immigration and people who had come to Canada, Canada represented a new home, a whole place of safety and security. And this idea that, in effect, that promise was betrayed, that in fact, there was no such place as home, no place like home. There was no place like home for those, in effect, who look for it. And yet there's that double entendre, this notion that, well, of course it's home, of course it's home, and there's no place I'd rather be. But here it was that sense of betrayal, and hence the title.
At the Kobzar Book Award presentation, you will read an excerpt from your book. What paragraph did you choose to read and why?
The paragraph I choose to read, I've actually several pages right from the get-go, right from the outset of the book, in the introduction, and it starts off with an anecdote. And the anecdote has to do with this young boy, 17 years of age. His father was a naturalized citizen of Canada, had arrived from Halichinau, and he was arrested. He was arrested because he didn't have papers identifying that he was employed and that he had an abode or a residence. And he was thrown into a prison camp, Banff internment camp. And the father, who was a seasonal laborer, found out that his son was incarcerated in this camp, sort of pleaded for his release. And the statement that the father made to authorities was, "I can't believe that Canada would do this to its own people." And in fact, the authorities recognized and understood that John Condro, the lad in question, was both underage, that he was a citizen of Canada because he was sort of a son of a naturalized citizen, and they had a Canadian citizen behind barbed wire, and they chose to ignore it. They chose to ignore it because effectively, once he was designated an enemy alien he was. And so I thought that was a very appropriate kind of. John Condro would later sort of escape. Seeing no way out, he would escape, and he was lost to his family forever. And I thought it was a very important sort of illustration of the kinds of sort of difficulties these people were placed in, and more importantly, the severity of what had happened to him, and the willingness on the part of officials to ignore what was obvious to everybody. He was a Canadian citizen.
Mm-hmm. So neither the family of John Condra or history, we don't know what happened to this boy.
Well, we sort of do, and it has a lot to do with his extended family lives here in Canada. And he eventually, miraculously, made it to the United States, crossed the border, went to the United States, and he became involved in sort of labor activity in the United States, and he was deported. He was deported to the Soviet Union. So which was like another prison house, a prison house of nations. So he was imprisoned in Canada in an internment camp, and later on found himself in the Soviet Union, and his children pleaded, being that they were the children of once a Canadian citizen, to be returned back to their home to Canada, and sadly they did not.
They did not. Oh, another story.
Another story, yeah.
No Place Like Home is a substantial academic publication, a must-read for anyone who would like to know about internment camps. But what would be the few facts that you would like, to convey to every reader, to everyone who would like to know about internment camps? What would be the important few facts?
I think that part of why I do what I do, which is this is I believe the 6th book that I've written on this subject, is that it's an episode in Canadian history that's not very well known. It's not very well known because in effect it sort of flies in the face, or it contradicts what we generally tend to believe about what constitutes Canada as a just society, if you will, and it's true. It's a society governed by laws, but we also have to understand that at times it's failed, and this is just one example of it. And we need to recover that history. We need to know that history as a community, as Ukrainian Canadians, and as part of a community to which this had happened. We need to remember. We need to understand it, and we have to understand its significance, and use that as a way to both alert us to what might happen. We think that it may never happen, but it happens continuously. We see what's happening in the United States today. So we have to be aware of the possibilities. But in that awareness, we need to know what had happened and take that lesson forward.
Mm-hmm. And taking that lesson, I would like to ask you a little bit different question, which not relating to the book. We are recording this interview today on the 24th of February, which is a sad 4th anniversary of full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. A few days ago, a government of Canada, through Canadian media, conveyed to the Ukrainian citizens who found shelter in Canada that they are to return to Ukraine after war ends. What do you think about this, and how the history will see this in the future?
We all acknowledge that this is a difficult time in Ukraine's history, and it not only constitutes a sort of a violation of rights generally against the nation, but against individuals who have taken the extreme measure of sort of fleeing. They are refugees. They are individuals who have fled the country. The argument, of course, is that Ukraine needs its people, and that the hope always has been that those who have fled will return to Ukraine one day. This is their home. Ukraine is their home, and yet also Canada is their home. And so we have to be cognizant of the fact that Ukraine is under attack, and continues to be under attack, and that Canada should extend its, as it has, a helping hand and continue to allow for these individuals to find shelter in Canada at this time, at this moment of extreme crisis.
Should they be allowed to stay in Canada if they choose so?
Well, but of course, there's a process, and the process is that, if when the war ends, and it's not if the war ends, it will end, and when that war ends, there's a process by which, in effect, Ukrainians can apply to, as others have, through the immigration process. They're vetted and so on and so forth. This, however, is a different kind of circumstances. These are individuals who have come to Canada and to other sort of countries who have extended a helping hand and provided shelter. This is what this moment requires. The time will come where, in effect, people who want to stay in Canada, they can do so through the normal sort of immigration vetting process.
Professor Kordan, thank you very much for your conversation. We wish you all the best with Kobzar Book Award.
Well, thank you so much. I look forward to attending that event.
And to our viewers, Kobzar Book Award presentation is happening on March 26th at the Canadian Museum of Human Rights. And for tickets and more information, please visit kobzarbookaward.com.